Welcome to Brewed in Monmouth, the real estate tea with Kate and Doreen. We're here to talk homes, hometown gems, and real conversations with the entrepreneurs and locals who keep Monmouth County buzzing. I'm Kate, and as always,
I'm Doreen. Each week, we're bringing you the voices behind the businesses, the stories behind the sales, and the tea you need to hear. So grab your favorite drink and let's get into it.
hello, welcome to another episode of Brewed in Monmouth, the real estate tea with Kate and Doreen. We are so happy to have Valerie Alvrin on today. We bring you a lot of local gems in Monmouth County, the best entrepreneurs, the greatest restaurants, but here we're getting back to real estate. We have a very hot real estate market in Monmouth County still. Buyers are giving up a lot of rights in order to get into a house, maybe not as many as before, but it's still something that's happening. And seeking legal advice from a very experienced attorney is really essential to having a great transaction. So we're so happy that you're here with us, Val.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.
We're because we have so much appreciation in our real estate market, capital gains are a real issue for sellers.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So when you sell your home or when you sell any property that you own, and hopefully you're making a profit, we have to decide how that profit impacts you. So if you're selling your principal residence where you've lived for 2 or more of the last 5 years, so figure the last 2 years or 2 of the last 5 years, and you haven't sold another home in that last 2-year period, the government says that you're entitled to make a profit of $250,000 if you're single and $500,000 between a married couple on the sale of the property. And so, for example, if you bought a house for $500,000 and you sold it for $1 million and you're married, then all of the gain that you made, that $500,000 in gain that you made, you would be yours tax-free and you wouldn't have to pay any tax on.
For the state of New Jersey as well?
For the state of New Jersey as well. So the state mirrors the federal government on that. They're together. The tax is separate, but there is together, okay? So let's change that example a little bit. Let's say that you bought a house for $500,000 and you're selling it for $1 million, but you're single. There's just you. So you're entitled to make a profit of $250,000. Now we have a $250,000 of profit left over, right? $1 million minus the $500 minus the $250,000. So now you have a $250,000 gain. You're entitled to write off any capital improvements you made to the property, a new roof, new heating, new air conditioning, new kitchens, new bathrooms. So it's important when you own your own home to save your receipts because you never know when you might need them when you sell. And when you're selling, please don't clean out your receipts and throw them out in the anticipation of sale because that's actually the time that you may need them the most. So you're selling for $1 million, you bought for $500,000, you're one person, and you did $100,000 worth of improvements. So now you're left with $150,000 in profit. You will pay tax on that money to the federal and the state governments when you file your tax return for the year in which you sold.
And what percentage is that?
Well, that's going to vary based on your income tax rate and what tax rate you pay. Mm-hmm. But it's probably fair to budget 25%.
Total between the two?
Again, depends. I can't say completely because it's going to depend on your income tax rate.
Yes.
And what tax bracket you're in and what your rate is.
So like with everything, we encourage people to surround yourself with the professionals, ask the right questions. I can't advise you on that. Your lawyer may or may not advise you on that. Talk to your financial advisor. Just so you have to pay your taxes. You're not getting around that. But just make sure you understand what your true net is going to be because of the money that you're going to be required to pay out.
And also the time periods that are involved because sometimes someone will come to me and they've owned their home less than 2 years. And if they sell in that less than 2-year period, absent some exceptions in the tax code, you're going to owe capital gains tax. So maybe the consideration is that you want to wait the 2 years so that you can walk away with your profit tax-free. Mm-hmm. So that's also, and so that swings back to what you just said, which is even your lawyer likely will tell you to speak to your accountant because your tax situation is unique to you. And as your lawyer, I may not know things that your accountant does that may impact your tax situation.
Everybody's
lot of
an
sense.
expert in their own little lane. Like we might know a little other, outside information, but the true professional is the one that everybody should lean on, especially in real estate.
I hate doing net sheets even because you don't know everything and you don't know what you only know what they're disclosing. So
You don't.
I
and
don't
you're
want
like,
to show a number. I mean, I do it, but I'm like,
Right, because
with the caveat, check with your
because we
accountant.
don't know what other expenses they
Estimate.
have.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes when I'm speaking to clients and I discuss this with them, they'll say something, for example, like, well, can I use my one-time exclusion? That's a very old tax law. I think it predated Bill Clinton as president. I'm
wow.
not actually joking, for real. So that was replaced by this much more generous 250,000 each every other year scenario. So it does not exist. Now,
Is it from the date of purchase or
Yes.
the date of CO? So say you like
purchase
Okay,
when
so
you close?
So if you bought the property, knocked the house down, built a house, and only lived in it for less than 2 years, but you owned it for more than 2 years,
because it took like 6 months to build or something.
Yeah. Would they come after you for that? Maybe.
I think it's from the date of your deed.
Okay.
Again, that would be a very specific accountant question, but it really goes from date of purchase, from date of your deed, that your 2-year exclusion would start kicking in. And this example that we just talked about is for your principal residence.
Right.
So if you're selling something that's not your principal residence, you're selling an investment property, you're selling a second home, you don't get the exclusion at all. So you have to pay capital gains tax on your entire profit minus your expenses. You don't get to exclude anything. So if you own a beach house and same numbers, you bought it for 5, you're selling it for $1 million, you put 10,000 into it and you have a profit of $490,000, you will be paying capital gains tax on $490,000.
Makes sense.
So that exclusion only applies to your principal residence. You can write off closing costs as well as part of your expenses against your gain, your commission and your lawyer to cover all the people in this room. Those expenses are tax deductions off that gain as well. But you have to pay capital gains tax on that, and that would be to the federal and the state. If you are selling an investment property, so not a second home, not a beach home, something that you rent out, and you're selling it and you want to avoid tax, you could do what's called a 1031 exchange.
Those get very complicated.
Yeah, but simply it means you're exchanging one property for another, so you wouldn't pay tax on it in the year you sold it. You would defer the tax until you sold the replacement property.
You have to identify it within 180 days, correct?
You have to identify it within 45 days.
Oh, 45 days.
And you can identify up to 3 properties within 45 days of closing, and you have to close on one of those properties you identified within 180 days of
Close
closing.
180 days. Okay.
But there's motivation there. I did a couple of 1031 exchanges right here in town, and I thought they were like easy peasy. I wasn't on the probably the complicated accounting part of it, but there was motivation to find that property and to close on that property because the clock was ticking. I kind of like doing them.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're selling an investment property, then it's great because then you don't pay your tax now. Some other things to note about 1031 exchanges are any real property is an even exchange for real property. So you can sell a house and replace it with a commercial building or a shopping center or a strip mall or land, and it can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be in the same state where you did the sale. You can exchange it for anything in the United States.
Would you still pay capital gains tax in New Jersey if you were going to buy, say, something in Florida?
No.
Okay.
So you're tax exempt because of the exchange.
Got it.
There's no gain realized now, so you wouldn't pay New Jersey anything either.
And can you keep rolling properties in a 1031 exchange indefinitely, or do you only get a few?
No, you can keep rolling them
No
over.
limit.
That's great.
Yeah, so there are rules about not, what money, you can't take money out. If you do, you'd have to pay tax on it. So essentially you take all the money and you roll it into the next property.
So you couldn't cash out?
You'd have to pay tax on what
that.
you're cashing
Understood.
out, and the entity stays the same. So if I'm selling, then I have to buy, that kind of thing. But leaving aside getting into any kind of rules that get complicated, in a nutshell, that's what you get. So That's definitely one thing that you can do to try to avoid paying tax on a commercial property. Again, it doesn't apply to your home or a second home. You have to have been using it for business purposes, renting it out. It doesn't apply to flips either. So if you buy something, renovate it, sell it, that's not a 1031 exchange because it has to have been held for rental purposes or business purposes.
For how long?
I think generally speaking, a year is a good rule of thumb. I do not believe that the tax code has any strict deadlines or guidelines, but so probably a need-based showing for why you needed to do something different would work. But as a general purpose, you're going to hold it out for a period of time.
Do you have to show an income stream if you were audited, maybe?
Not necessarily. In other words, if I bought it and I was trying to rent it out and I couldn't rent it out, but I could demonstrate that I was trying to rent it out, like I bought a shopping center and there was commercial space that was vacant, that'd probably work if you were trying to show that you were trying to rent it, as opposed to I sold a single-family house, I bought a single-family house, I never rented it out or did anything with it, and then I looked to flip it again.
Got it. And so for a 1031 exchange, you have 45 days from the day you closed on the property with the big gain to identify up to 3 properties and close on those within 180 days after?
That's the general rules. There are some variations on that depending on the tax year and when your tax returns and doing other things. But as a general matter, those are the rules.
Got it.
And just like the warning that comes with that as well is that if you wanted to do a 1031, you would consult on that particular transaction with your attorney and your accountant, who will advise you on that specific circumstance, how things go. When you do a 1031, an exchange company is used because your lawyer can't hold the money. The IRS says that the person who's holding the funds has to be a qualified intermediary. That's someone who has no connection to you. And so there'd be another participant that's involved in the exchange.
Is that like your title company or is there specific exchange
There
companies?
are companies that do that. You pay them a fee. They also file all the proper paperwork with the IRS, and they make sure that you're following all the rules and dates and deadlines for things. But an exchange can normally be set up very quickly. So even if you're a few days away from closing, normally we could pivot to still doing an exchange if that's something somebody decided they wanted to do, even super late in the transaction.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people are learning about this right now. It's not really that out there in the marketplace, I don't think.
So you're a real estate attorney, just like we're real estate agents. It's kind of rough out there right now, don't you think?
It is. Can I say one more thing about tax
Yes.
before we go on? I just want to say, because Doreen, you and I had talked about that there's probably a misconception in New Jersey about something called an exit tax. So I just wanted to touch on that for a moment. So I think that came from the radio station when the government first enacted this law. And I'll say that lawyers, we hate this because we're not revenue agents. We don't really like being involved in collecting tax for the state of New Jersey. There really isn't an exit tax. You're not being taxed because you're leaving New Jersey. That's really where the common misunderstanding is. What it is if you have a gain, so you're not exempt because you're selling your principal residence, but you have a gain or potential gain, and you're selling and you're leaving the state of New Jersey, the state says, hey, we don't want to have to chase you to get this capital gains tax that you might owe us. So we're going to collect it at closing. We're going to take 2% of the sales price, and we're going to hold it until you file your New Jersey non-resident tax return, and then you'll settle up with us. So if you don't owe anything, you'll get it all back. And if you owe something more or less, then we'll settle up. It's not a tax because you're leaving the state, and that's the part that people misunderstand. They think they're being taxed because they're leaving New Jersey. They think that because that's sort of what's out there about it, but really it's not true. You're being taxed because you potentially owe money. You'd owe it whether you stayed or you left. They're just collecting it from you in advance.
That makes sense.
Yeah, as opposed to chasing you down in another state.
Right, which they don't have the resources for,
Right.
So they
Don't want to chase
typically-
their money.
They want to do it. If we know on its face that you're exempt, you're selling a principal residence, and I can see that you did not make more than the amount allowed, then we know we don't have to pre-collect the money. So probably the most people, maybe 80 or 90%, either live in the state and we don't deal with the issue, or are on their face exempt. We can see on their face they're not going to owe any money. So it really leaves a small percentage of transactions where people are subject to the non-resident withholding is what it is legally called.
Okay.
So it's still something that we can prep them with as a possibility if we know that they're leaving the state. But again, refer to your accountant about it and see what, how it'll impact you based on your age, what you made, what your profit is and all that other stuff, because that'll change.
Right.
Becomes very individualized.
And important for you to know, because that way, or for me to know, because we don't want our clients to be caught unaware that they have to withhold this money at closing when they weren't anticipating it in advance. So if you're going to remain a New Jersey resident post-closing, then we don't have to withhold the money.
Makes perfect sense.
So thank you. That's what I wanted to add.
No, that's very good.
Because it is, so many people are very confused by it. And we just put it out there without knowing what they could ultimately be responsible for or not. So we're not those experts. That's where you really need the accountant in your part of the real estate transaction.
We have a lot of taxes, of course, here, but people sort of peg New Jersey a little unfairly with that because they think, another reason to leave, I'm being taxed because I'm leaving, and it's just not, not the case.
So is it a play on like what exit do you live at?
I never thought of that. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, right? Especially if it's coming from a radio head. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think they started doing this back when they increased the transfer fee and added the original mansion tax to the situation. So it's been a while, probably about 20 years now, that we've been dealing with the transfer fee the capital gains tax collection.
The withholding.
Yeah.
So those are really good pieces of advice for sellers. And anybody who is thinking about selling their house, like, we so need the inventory, we want you to sell the house. But you just want to understand too what your net proceeds could ultimately wind up being, right?
Right.
So that's great for sellers to understand. And then on the flip side of that, buyers have a lot of changes on their end too. We did previously touch on how that was called a mansion tax, but that burden is now on the sell side as a supplemental realty tax fee that the seller is now paying. But there was also another big change that happened 2 years ago with the buyer agency agreements.
Yes.
So you can touch on how important that is for buyers to understand.
It feels
too.
longer, but I think it was only last summer.
Yeah, it was last August. That was it.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So New Jersey passed a new consumer law. For those in the industry, they know that it sort of mirrored the lawsuit that was nationwide that involved the Board of Realtors. But New Jersey made a consumer law that says, among many other things, that when you are a buyer and you are working with an agent, you need to have an agreement in writing with that agent called a buyer's agency agreement. And among other things, the agency agreement talks about how your agent is going to get paid. Because before the law went into effect, it used to be that the seller predominantly paid the commission and advertised in advance, based on the agreement they signed with their agent, how much they were going to pay to the buyer's agent. But the new law said, we're not allowed to do that anymore. So the new law said, seller, you can make an agreement with your lawyer in writing, your agent in writing about what you're going to pay them. But what you're going to pay the buyer's agent, you are not allowed to agree on in advance. You're not allowed to advertise. And so that has to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis with every offer.
So it's really important for buyers to sit down with one agent, two agents, have many agents as you want, find out, learn from them what they can do for you, and really think about who you want to align yourself with, because as a buyer's agent, there's a huge role that they play in getting you the house and
Absolutely.
understanding how to write the offer a certain way that you can win in a multiple bid situation.
Not just that, even locating the property too. I mean,
sure.
There are a lot of agents, myself included, that will go off market, try to find if you are in a specific neighborhood that you really want to be in. We'll do the extra legwork. So it's good to have an agreement signed with them. But that said, in our marketplace, you could still, the seller a lot of times still does pick up the fee if, if it's a negotiable term like anything else.
Right. Now it's much more of a conversation and it's
Absolutely.
much more negotiable. But
And much more transparent.
What buyers need to understand, though, is that it's a law to sign the buyer's agency agreement. I think buyers are still a little freaked out by that. They need to understand that they can do it for a 1-year period. They can do it just in this particular town. If they want to work with another agent in another town, they can do it for this one particular house if they're coming into an open house, or they just want maybe to see one of your properties or something like that. So, the conversations that buyers agents have to have with buyers today aren't just, sure, I'm either at 2:00. Those days are gone. We really need to sit down and have those conversations with the buyers, again, about compensation and what the relationship is, how the relationship is going to be structured. Do I want to work with you? Do you want to work with me?
Right.
It's really like having a first date with your buyers now.
That's right. And as you just said, the important thing is that buyers have to understand that state law requires that your agent have you sign this agreement before you start working together.
Meaning see any properties at all.
Yes.
That, it does.
Yes.
You are supposed to do that. So I understand it's new here. In other states, it's something that's been much more common over time. I've had clients who've come from other states where they've told me this is commonplace. It has not been commonplace in New Jersey. So before the law changed, it wasn't something people really did. So that's why I think people are not used to it. They're resistant to it. The agreement will allow you as a buyer to say to your agent how you want to structure the commission. So you can say to your agent, I only want you to show me properties where the seller pays the commission, or I'm open to having a split of the commission, but it will discuss what your compensation will be as the buyer's agent and how that will work.
And again, you can pivot based on the situation that you're walking into. If you need to be stronger, on one way or another way to make that, hopefully get your offer accepted, you have to have that open communication and understanding with your agent that you can, restructure it to the best possible, to present you in the best possible light to hopefully win the house.
Right.
Because that's the
Because
goal.
when you fill out the contract as the buyer, your agent is going to fill in how you are going to be compensated. And now on the contracts, there's a split box. So it gives you the options, commission to be paid by
Seller.
buyer, commission to be paid by seller. And it would allow you to split that commission or to change whatever percentage that you want to do on that commission. So the idea behind the new law, whether it works or not is a whole other question. But the idea behind it is that it gives the consumer, the seller and the buyer as consumers, the ability to negotiate these things where before they were set in advance.
Right.
I think one of the southern states, I wish I knew more of the details actually, even though it was a federal lawsuit, national lawsuit, just threw it out and said that it was the seller's decision whether or not they could advertise. I wish I knew more about it. I want to say it was like Tennessee or Alabama.
Yeah.
Just to advertise in general that they could use systems in place for it. So it is still a very changing dynamic situation. But in New Jersey, that is the law of the land.
Yeah.
And it really has. I think it makes for a more educated buyer, more educated consumer. And honestly, I've spun my wheels a little bit less because from the outset, you're just kind of setting expectations for everybody from the beginning of the relationship, which is great.
Yes.
Yeah. That's totally agreed.
Yeah, it's forcing you to have a conversation that a lot of buyer agents didn't have in the past. They took it for granted, that the seller, the listing agent already negotiated that fee and it just was what it was. Now they're sitting there negotiating their fee with their buyers.
And telling the buyers what exactly you're going to do for them.
For sure.
Because on our, not on the attorney side, but on the agent side, I think a lot of, we try to make it magic and do a lot of things behind the scenes for our clients. We're now kind of spelling it out a little more. Well, I did this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
And this is what you can expect for me to do for you. Especially if you're looking for off-market properties, it's incredibly time-consuming.
Very time-consuming. Just running the comps and running the numbers, at midnight on your computer. There's so much work that goes in behind the scenes that I think, both buyers and sellers don't understand.
Yeah.
But as do you too. You know what I'm saying? As a lawyer, your job is not 9 to 5. You still work, and you might turn off your phone, but you're still working. It's.
I think that, though, people understand when you hire your attorney, we don't work on a contingency fee basis. And so I'm entitled to be paid on your transaction, whether it closes or it doesn't close. But you do so much work on something that may never even come to fruition. Right. So if I'm working on your file for a year, I'm going to charge you for the year that I worked on your file. It will not be a flat fee arrangement of whatever I would charge on one deal. But that's not how your compensation works. Right. So if you showed someone 50 houses and then,
they decide to move to Florida.
You're putting in a tremendous amount of time and gas and energy and so there's something fair about that you're both committing to one another.
Right.
Because you are spending also an incredible amount of time. And if they don't get anything they want, then you understand, of course, that you haven't been paid, but that you're entitled to have the idea that if and when they do buy something under the terms of your agreement, that you are going to be paid.
It's that loyalty that you just want.
Yeah.
That we didn't have, a year and a half ago always, unless certain, like you said, up here it really wasn't that common. Now it needs to be. And a buyer also needs to understand that they can terminate that contract. All they need to do is send you an email.
Right.
This isn't working out. We're moving on, or whatever it is. So they're not handcuffed. They're not tied to you. You want it to be a working, amicable relationship.
That's how it feels best.
That's how everything always works, right? There's a give and a take, but you need to know that you're working for, the best interest and trusting that that's what that agent is doing for you.
That said, I was going to touch on this earlier. I do feel, at least recently, that there's been a lot more contentiousness sort of between the sellers and the buyers, I think because the market is so high. Have you experienced that too? Or do you think it's just, a phenomenon in the Kate Raftery world?
No. Not only your world. Sorry.
Yeah. Everyone's sad.
I feel like when I bought my first house, which we won't talk about how long ago that was, right? I just feel that expectations were different. You didn't ask for a lot of things on inspections and really was a structural inspection. And so things have changed now where I guess because prices are so high, buyers have different expectations of the condition of the property and the things that sellers are going to do for them. And sellers don't always share the same expectations.
No.
Right.
No. Mm-hmm. And even if you try to educate people from the beginning of saying this is what could possibly happen when push comes to shove, I just think residential home sales, especially a long-held property, are very emotional for people. Both the buyers and the sellers, because the buyers have pictured their life in there and the sellers live their life in there. And I don't see it changing unless the sellers need the buyers a little bit more.
I try to explain to clients when they're buyers that when they make their inspection lists, they have to remember that this is a home. It's very personal to the seller. And if you write a laundry list of things, it really feels like criticism because the seller lives in this house and you're saying to them, wow, here's 50 things that are all wrong with the house you lived in. And the seller's like, this is my house. I feel insulted that you're saying all these things. And so you have to kind of try to temper that it's a business transaction and there's a lot of money at stake. But it's also very personal to the seller and to the buyer because, as you said, right, they're envisioning their future here.
And short of a major defect, it's not time to renegotiate the price of the house. You know what I'm saying? The house didn't change much from when you put in that offer to where it is today. You might know a little bit more about the house. Most of the times, none of which the seller would be addressing if they weren't selling the house, right? So it does get very, very emotional for both sides. But, sometimes you have to give a little to get. And if the goal is to get that house, there's ways to work it out. I mean, everything pretty much everything I think is fixable. Even structural issues are fixable. If
Yes.
you want it bad enough, it can be remediated.
Yes.
And, it takes that conversation between the lawyers, between the two agents. And if the seller really wants to sell and the buyer really wants to buy, we usually, make it work out.
I can give you sort of an example that in seller, we're delving into undisclosed topics for this. Sellers frequently like to advertise their property as is, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's very common. Sellers will frequently tell me, if they don't tell you to put in the listing, it's as is. And I feel that when sellers start out, before they speak to me, they have this idea in their mind somehow that if I said it's as is, it means the buyer isn't going to get to ask for anything on inspections. But in the legal world that we're in, that really doesn't, the as-is language doesn't mean anything. It really seems to be seller speak for, I don't
wanna do
plan on
anything.
doing anything. But it doesn't mean that the buyer's precluded from raising inspection issues, and if we don't agree, to terminate. So in New Jersey, a seller is never obligated to do anything, whether they say as is or not. It's a negotiation. And so saying as is doesn't accomplish anything from a legal perspective other than maybe trying to put your buyer on some kind of psychological notice that you don't intend to address any issues for them.
Or sometimes it can backfire on them and it puts the buyer on notice that, what's up with this house? What is as is? What are they not telling us or anticipating can happen?
I
As
think
is
that
can be very
100%.
negative sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because definitely buyers will say, what are they hiding? Why
Right
are
off
they
the
saying
bat.
it's as is? Right
Yeah,
off the bat.
I find that a lot.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just feel like you need to put it in there if it's like an elderly person selling their home, or it's an estate and the kids, live across the country and now they're just trying to sell, a parent's house that maybe they inherited or something and they have no intentions of, making repairs. They never lived there. But I guess maybe it's a case-by-case situation, but it does definitely have a negative connotation to it.
Right. But the seller needs to understand, which usually is what I go over with them, that even though you're saying it's as is, it legally doesn't preclude the buyer from raising any issue.
Right.
Instead, what we may try to do, the lawyers, is narrow what the buyer's inspection requests can be in attorney review. So nothing cosmetic, perhaps nothing minor, nothing that's old but otherwise properly working. And so we try to narrow some of the inspection requests with that type of language.
But all of which can be interpreted very differently. Your version of as is or old versus mine. It's really very interesting how people can, two little words or a couple of words can be so, the perspective is just so different.
I don't think we would sit here if we tried to even agree on what the word structural means.
Yeah.
Or what the word mechanical means.
Material, that's my favorite one.
Material.
Everything's material.
Well, our
Really?
favorite as lawyers is when people put in informational purposes only, except. So nobody really understands what it means to be for informational purposes only. And then it goes on to it be except for structural, environmental, safety, and mechanical, which is absolutely everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
So why'd you even waste your time typing that into the contract?
I guess it sounds good. So,
Yeah.
someone
But that's
might
again when
think
you
it
need a good
sounds-
agent on the other
Right.
side that says, Mr. Seller, this might sound good to you, but I'm telling you it's complete BS. Don't read into it.
Right.
They're doing inspections and they're going to ask for basically everything except maybe they won't get you on the loose cabinet doorknob.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Well,
maybe.
Which is why, as an attorney, and when I represent a seller, I definitely try to include language that says you can't ask for things that are old if they're otherwise properly working. Because your inspector will frequently conclude that things are at the end of their projected life, but that's very different than what the actual life may be.
Right.
I sold a house with a furnace that was 71 years old.
Right. Well, that's a classic.
And it was still working, fine. And I had a good inspector on it, and he was like, I wouldn't replace it until it dies. It's still working.
Because it's
still
made
efficient."
better
Yeah.
than what you're going to be replacing it
71
with
years
today.
old.
One of my
1952.
favorite examples is that the life expectancy of a hot water heater is 8 years old.
Yeah.
But frequently, hot water heaters can be 20 or more years old. Depends on your hot water heater and your usage and everything else. So does that mean at 8 years, right, by that logic that the buyer should be entitled to a credit for a whole new hot water heater that they may not replace for 20 years?
Right.
You know, so it's fairer to have an objective defect that needs to be addressed. But that age alone really isn't the basis.
No, if you're getting rusty cold water,
Right.
you need a new hot water heater.
Or leaking.
Right,
Or
if the
leaking
water
gas.
doesn't get
leaking,
hot,
yes.
right?
But if
leaking,
it's not, like,
emitting carbon monoxide.
yeah. If it's not doing any of those, then you just deal with it until you have to replace it, or you could replace it proactively and call it a day, right? But that's really good information to share too, because there's so much more in this than just finding that pretty house, you know. And both buyers and sellers, when they're going down this journey with you, there's so many things that can come up, and we could have a million different hypotheticals, but we get through them all, right?
Right.
There's no reason why. Well, there's a few reasons that things might, come to an end, but most of the times they usually don't. Most of the times we can really negotiate our way through them and put the emotions aside, just deal with the case at hand, and go through it reasonably and rationally.
Well, and that's why it's important to have experienced people.
Yes.
To be working with you. An experienced attorney and an experienced New Jersey attorney, and of course your experienced real estate professional as well, because they are aware of what needs to be handled and how, and has the experience to be able to do it.
Right. Regardless of the price of the house that you're buying, because that, just is very individual, right? Like a $500,000 house is as meaningful as a $2 million house to the person buying it.
Absolutely.
When you're buying usually your largest expense in your lifetime, now is not the time to try to cut corners. Now is not the time to use, your cousin who is a divorce attorney to handle your real estate
Who's in
transaction.
court all the time.
Right? So there's something like you need to hire a real estate attorney that does this 24/7, knows those contracts in and out, has relationships with other lawyers. Your relationships with your peers is very, very important, because, sometimes you do need to pick up the phone and just say, hey, listen, how are we going to make this work? We're not going to let the transaction fall apart. How can we make this work for both the buyer and the seller? And it's that relationship that can save a transaction. Just like, relationships between agents. We pick up the phone and we talk to each other to try to figure out how to make it work. That's what all the negotiation is about. It's not just opening the door and showing them a beautiful house.
It's 100% true that it happens almost on a daily basis, where having been doing this for 25 years, as this part, I've been a lawyer longer. I know I don't look it.
You don't. No, but you focus solely on real estate for 25 years.
Yeah.
That's great, Val. Congratulations.
And every transaction's different.
Maybe not every transaction, but there are
every week
people,
or something.
People are different.
Yeah.
People are different. And so while the transaction may be similar, people are not similar, and people think and react differently to things. So that makes every transaction different and special.
Just rules of engagement change too, and we're living in such a polarizing world right now that it makes it hard sometimes to get people to just bring it down a notch and just look at the big picture.
This is kind of more of a larger thing, but people now, I feel like if you don't have their exact worldview, or you don't agree with them exactly about a transaction, they think something's a big deal, and you're like, well, I have a lot of experience. This actually could be remedied a different way. Your $60,000 estimate is a little exaggerated. It does kind of now, unfortunately, I think people aren't used to being disagreed with. They see things that are exact, like on an algorithm, it's exactly what they think, that they think they're not in your team anymore. And that I find interesting, because I'm totally on your team, but I'm trying to give you some good advice here. And I think that's getting worse.
Where people are getting information off the internet, but the internet information is wrong. But of course, they don't think it's wrong because it came from the internet or from Dr. Google.
It's coming out of their
ChatGPT.
Right?
ChatGPT. And so when they ask you the question or they say it, I go, that's not right. And they go, but I read that on the internet, but it's still wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you.
It was
I think
fun.
it's great information. We love having our real estate experts. on. And Valerie, you've been doing it for 25 years. You're an excellent attorney, and
Well, thank you.
you've been a huge help on so many transactions, difficult ones, easy ones. I know Kate has used you too, and we're so grateful for the relationships that we have with our lawyers. Not all of New Jersey uses lawyers. You know, we do here in Monmouth, the Middlesex and Ocean, but I yield to you and I lean on you so much because you're the expert when it comes to the legality, and words can really be interpreted very, very differently.
They sure can.
You know, that expression is one of my favorites. It's in penny wise, dollar foolish.
yes.
And so sometimes people think they're going to save money, but remember that buying and selling a house is a legal transaction. You have a contract, you have rights, you're interpreting the law, and if you're not equipped to do that for yourself, then you're relying on someone else to do it for you. And if it's not a lawyer, then now you're getting legal advice from someone who's not a lawyer.
Right.
And so again, you don't know whether, you know, that advice is correct or not. So it's important, in my opinion, I'm obviously biased, but it's important to have a lawyer to represent you. And it's important with anything that you do to have an experienced professional represent you.
Yes.
You know, you and I were chatting before, you wouldn't want to go to the surgeon who is on day one to perform your surgery.
Right.
You would want the surgeon with 25 years of experience or 10 years or however many it would be, who knows the ins and outs of your situation and the county and town that you live in.
Because it's also very different. Town to town, CO, you know, is so different from town to town.
Oh, it
And
really
listen,
is.
we all have our first day on the job, and we'll cheer people along, and we'll, you know, help them and mentor them and do whatever we have to do. But when you're dealing with what we're dealing with every single day, day in and day out, you just don't have that same understanding of what it takes to get the job done, because you're doing it maybe 3 times in your life, right? And what you did or what your mom and dad did 20 or 30 years ago is completely different today.
Right.
Completely different. But it's exciting, and we want everybody who wants to own a home to own a home. And, you know, sometimes new houses need new life in them. And we're, you know, it's so thrilling to get people into houses and to see them, you know, finally on closing day after all the ups and downs, to get them there. It's the one thing that carries me through, you know what I'm saying, to get them through. And then when they say thank you to you for guiding them properly, and the title company and everybody else that
makes your
you know,
day.
is part of the transaction, it does make your day.
Yeah.
It does. It makes all the craziness worthwhile.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, thank
So
you.
again, yes, thank you so
ladies,
much
for having me here. And I'm happy to come back anytime to join your chat. So.
Thanks.